Sego, you found our introduction page. Please read everything on the page. I'm going to tap on Next to find prefix charts. Within this page, you should read all of this information. There's some videos here you can watch. And you're going to want to download this chart here at the bottom of the page where it says prefix charts. So you can click to view it right here, or you can click on the name and that will download the charts. This is the prefix chart document. There are 10 pages here that discuss the different pronouns and how they differ from each other and how we modify them from verb root to verb root and how they differ from pronouns in English. So in our first introductory course, you learned about 5 prefixes per verb root. In this course, you're going to learn all the prefixes for each verb root. But let's break it down a little bit. First of all, you learned the red prefixes. You learned how to say genues, for I like it. It might be helpful to think about the red prefixes as being something that you're in control of, like gekunis, I cook. And it might be helpful to think about the blue prefixes as being something that you're not in control of, as in wagenuwaktenis, I get sick. Keep in mind, though, that there are always exceptions to every rule, so it's helpful if you don't think of that as a hard and fast rule. It's a lot easier to get a handle on the red and blue prefixes and harder to get a handle on the purple prefixes just because there's so many of them and we don't really have a counterpart to them in English. So it's just important to remember that prefixes, we can't say anything without them in Ganyangeha, so it's really important that you learn how they work. These charts will definitely help you figure out how the prefixes work, and let's break the charts down a little bit. So this is our first prefix chart on page 3. This is all the red and blue prefixes for every stem. When I say stem, I am referring to what letter the root starts with. So we have C stem roots, and by C stem, I mean that the root starts with a consonant. When I say A stem, I mean that the root starts with the letter A, and so on. In Unit 1, we're not going to worry about all of the stems. In fact, we're not going to be covering I, E, or O stem roots at all. So we can worry about all of these ones later in other units. In Unit 1, this particular unit, we're actually going to only cover these first 3 columns: C stem, red and blue, and A stem, blue. We will also be covering the purple prefixes for the C stem verb roots. So hang on to these charts for later units when we will be covering the other stems. Do notice, though, that they're not entirely different beasts. There are just slight variations depending on what the verb root starts with. This is one of the ways that I studied the prefixes. I made little cards like this. These are about the size of a business card, and I carried them in my wallet. And that way I could pull them out whenever I was waiting in line or waiting for my food to come at a restaurant. And if I was studying and I forgot one of my prefixes, I could quickly refer to them, either by looking at the card in my wallet, or I also made digital flashcards of these actual cards. So I also made digital flashcards of those cards that I made. So I took photos of the little paper cards that I made, and then what I did was I included them in my digital flashcard sets. So I have a photo here of that card for quick reference because I always have my phone with me. I never actually made an individual flashcard for each of the prefixes. Instead, I had these actual cards on hand. Everyone learns differently, though, so you have to find your own way to teach yourself the prefixes. Unfortunately, it's just a lot of memory work to get them in there. So this, page 4, this explains all the exceptions that we have to our rules. This is like how we conjugate our pronouns are prefixes with different verb root stems. Remember, we're only covering these first three things here. And on our first column here, we have two situations where we have some exceptions. We have two rules, and the rules are explained on the bottom of the page. So let's take a look at that. You can just read through that. So that first rule is that the E, the italicized E, disappears when it's attached to roots that begin with H or Y and most but not all Ks. And we've listed a bunch of examples down here. This is just so that you can see how that works. We're not going to be covering all of these particular terms in this unit, so don't worry about that for now. Just know that those rules are important for these sets of prefixes. Now we see another rule at the bottom here, that the underlined and italicized vowels at the end of the prefixes replace the first letters of the root that it's attached to. And that rule will be applicable to us in this unit when we are learning the root aderyandere, to know something. Aderyandere means to know something. We can use it right here like this, wagaderyandere, I know, saderyandere, you know. But when we move it down here to these prefixes that end with the letter O that are underlined, because those vowels are underlined, we would replace that letter A from our root and we would instead get roderyandere, yagoderyandere, and yoderyandere. So page 5 is all about one of our exceptions where we talk about the letter H, the gray letter H that you see in front of this prefix here, right here, this grayed out letter H. So this page is just discussing how that H comes into play. Notice that the H is not written or pronounced when nothing is attached in front of the prefix, but when we do modify the prefix by negating it or changing the tense, we do write and we do pronounce that letter H. So senuis, without the H, we don't see it or hear it, but when we change it to the negated form, yah desenuis, you can see that H comes into play, and we pronounce it and write it, yah desenuis. So remember that we're still just looking at these first three columns, and in those columns, we just have those two instances where this H rule comes into play. Page 6 is something that we will be looking at in later units. This is for rules that apply to verb roots that start with letters that we're not going to be using at this time. So read it for your interest, but you don't have to worry about these rules at this moment. Page 7, purple prefixes, all stems. Once again, we are looking at only the first column for C-stem prefixes. On page 8 is where we're going to discuss the different exceptions that come with these prefixes. For example, this italicized E at the beginning and the end of a prefix, and the grayed out H. So we're on page 8 now, where we're going to look at the exceptions for conjugating purple prefix verbs. This first area, we are looking at these italicized letter E's at the end of these prefixes. This exception means that this italicized E at the end disappears when they're attached to roots that begin with the letters H or Y. This rule is going to come into place for us because we are working with the root yachts. We've shown you a couple of examples here, like dagyenderi and dakrori. But I'll show you how it applies to a root that we will be using in our unit, and that is the root yachts. So our verb root yachts means to be called by a name. It doesn't apply to these examples of prefixes here because we use it for they call me or they call you or they call her. So these prefixes above are not to do with they. So when we combine it with yunge, for them to me, that italicized E is going to disappear and we're going to get yungyats, not yungeyats. We get yungyats and yundajats. At the bottom of the page, we have our H rule, where you see that all of our prefixes that start with the letter S have this grayed out letter H in front of them. And that H is going to come into play when we negate or use a different tense on these prefixes. So when we modify these prefixes in some way. So in our present tense form, we would have senues, you like her. If we negate that or modify that prefix, this letter H pops up. We have ya desenues. We pronounce and write that letter H because we've modified the prefix. So this is page 9. All prefixes see stem. This is probably the most important page in terms of seeing all the prefixes that you need to study for this unit. In addition to this page, take a look at the blue A-stem prefixes on page 5. And lastly, in our prefix chart documents is learning about possessive prefixes. We're not going to be covering possessive prefixes in this unit, so hang on to this page just for future reference.